Kicking it through the uprights, hold tight. Amazing stories, feeling stories, all out of sight. Jaw-dropping tales, just surreal thrills. They're always unreal. Kicking through the uprights, the legend seals the deal.
Good evening, and welcome to the third episode of Tom's Tall Tales and True Stories. I'm going to be telling you one of my most legendary stories tonight, called The Bear. And just to give you a little background, when you started watching this video, the first thing you probably saw, hopefully, was some canoeing in the Boundary Waters, which is a recreational area of millions of acres that borders both sides of the United States and Canadian border in Minnesota and up into Ontario, Canada. It's one of the most beautiful places I have ever been to in my life. And I have several very incredible stories that have taken place in the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters is hundreds, maybe thousands of lakes in which motorboats are not allowed. No motors are. It's all for people who are on canoes or kayaks. And it's pretty rugged, beautiful, incredible nature. Just incredible nature. If you ever get the chance, if you love to camp and you love to explore, you've got to go see the Boundary Waters. The place to start from, if you're on the United States side, is from a little town called Ely, E-L-Y, Ely, Minnesota. And from there you can rent all your equipment, your canoes. They can transport you to the launch sites, and you better bring your maps. You can't live without those maps, and actually that's part of one of the stories I'm going to tell tonight. So the first story in the Boundary Waters, and one of my first experiences in the Boundary Waters, which is something I will never forget in my entire life. It happened when I was 14. I had just finished 8th grade, so it was the summer between 8th and 9th grade. I hadn't yet started football. It was in the early summer in June. And every year prior to this year, I attended a Catholic camp in Minnesota called the CYC, Catholic Youth Center Camp. And that was an amazing, incredible experience. I went there probably 4 or 5 summers in a row. But when you got to be 14, and if you had the skills that they taught there, if you had mastered the skills of canoeing and other skills, life-saving was one of them, then you could sign up to go on a canoe trip. So they brought us in a school bus to Ely, where we then got our equipment, and then they brought us to the portage. Now I have to introduce you to the main character of this story, which is the counselor that guided us throughout this journey, throughout this mission of exploring the Boundary Waters. He had a very unusual name. His name was Otto Sponge. We all just called him Sponge because we loved that last name. But he was a young man in his 20s, tall, quiet, had a personality that as a young teenager, you just looked up to him. He seemed to command respect from everybody. not demand respect. He wasn't a drill sergeant. He was the opposite. He was calm, deliberate, focused, compassionate, understanding. And he seemed to have a way to make friends with each and every one of us on a personal level. And that was something that just struck me as so remarkable, as Otto Sponge was truly a person who had empathy, who had the ability to put himself in your shoes and understand where you're coming from, and then know how to take advantage of that understanding to help you in the trials that you're about to face during this canoe trip. So we took off. And I remember going through one lake, and then you hit a portage. Now, for those of you who haven't done canoe trips, you have to understand what a portage is. So a portage is generally the path that leads you from one lake to another. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're very long. Sometimes they're smooth and easy, sometimes they're very difficult. Sometimes you have to climb a lot of terrain up high. And in each portage, you are carrying, typically, in our case, we had a backpack on our back, a backpack on our stomach. So each person had 2 backpacks. And each person was either carrying 1 canoe on their shoulders or 2 people carrying 1 canoe, 1 in the front, 1 in the back. So that was our first portage. And then when we got into the next lake, which ironically was called Birch Lake, for a very good reason, because it seemed like a white picket fence around the entire lake. Because birch bark is white, unlike the Norway pines, which is a very dark brown. But the white really stood out. And this particular lake was just packed with birch trees. So it was this massive wall around the shore of the lake that looked like a white picket fence, only taller. We went through that day. We probably went through 3 or 4 portages to get to the next lake and the next lake before it was time to set up camp. So the first night we set up camp was down low. As a matter of fact, where we set camp was actually on an island. So we were able to, using our canoes, paddle to the island and then set up camp on the island. And I know Otto Sponge picked this spot because of its spectacular scenery. What it was about 4 waterfalls coming up from real high, all dumping the water over the falls and into this one big giant pond is the only way I could describe it. It really wasn't a lake. It was too small to be a lake, so it was a pond. And it was completely, surrounded. So the island we were on had waterfalls coming in our direction, not hitting the island, but close to it, from 4 different directions. It was the most spectacular scenery I have ever seen. That night, we could hear a lot of shouting. There was another group that had set up camp, but they were, of course, not on our island, but they set up camp on the main land, on the shore, and they got in pretty late. It was after dark, so setting up camp had to be rather difficult for them. And you could hear their voices talking. We were pretty tired, so we hit the sack pretty quickly, got in our our sleeping bags in our tents. And then we went to sleep, but about 3 o'clock in the morning, pitch dark, we started hearing shouting. And I know I got up and a couple of the other kids got up, and we got out to find out what all the shouting was about. Well, apparently there were bears at the camp that the other campers were at on the mainland. And you could hear them screaming and in a panic. So when the shouting stopped, we went back to bed. The next morning, we got up early at sunrise. You don't sleep much past sunrise when you're on these canoe trips. Somebody's already got the coffee brewing, starting to make some pancakes for breakfast, so you can kind of smell the food, and you're hungry, so you get up. And we could look over now. It was enough light to see, and we could see them packing their canoes up. So I got in my canoe, since I wasn't involved in making breakfast, and I went across the lake to find out what the shouting was about the night before. Really, only about 3 hours earlier. Well, when I got talking to him, yeah, there were bears in their camp. And they had made some foolish mistakes. Some of them had brought food into their tents, so the bears were trying to get to the food. That's a big no-no up there. Do not want to bring food in your tent. Not even gum, because the bears will smell that out too. But the second thing they did, which is considered smart, is they put their main foods in a big sack and tied it up high in a tree. Now, normally, that keeps it away from the animals. But these particular bears climbed the tree and got at that sack of food and destroyed it. So basically, they had lost all the food that they had brought with them for their trip. And this was their first night, just as it was ours. So they were packing up and heading back to Texas, where they came from, which blew my mind right there, that they would come all the way from Texas to basically Canada, and then have to turn around and go all the way back and spend one night there. And I think the experience had shaken up a lot of them, so they were already ready to go back. It was too dangerous as far as they were concerned. For us, we packed it up after breakfast, got ready to take off, cleaned up the campfire and cleaned up everything, make sure we didn't leave anything behind, and took off. Otto was always in the first canoe. Somehow I ended up always in the stern of the last canoe. But it wasn't hard, because all you had to do is follow the canoe in front of you. About mid-afternoon, we've been canoeing now since early morning. So about mid-afternoon, we got to this lake, and it was very different from the other lakes in that it had cliffs on both sides that were extremely tall cliffs. So this had been some place where a river had gorged out, this giant canyon. So you had these huge cliffs on both sides. So, and then, the lake was one long and fairly skinny lake. But as it started to spread out, as you've got further north, the lake started to expand its width. And we finally came to an island that reminded me of the shape of a book if you stood the book up on its end. So it had walls on two sides, and then what appeared to be a very plateau with trees at the very top. But it was cliff all the way up. So following Otto Sponge's lead, we tied our canoes up at the base. And he knew just the right place to climb up to get to the plateau at the top. It was at the end of one of the islands. So it took us a good hour, and we had our backpacks on our back and our backpacks on his front, and we're climbing almost straight up. Now, we didn't need ropes or anything like that. It wasn't that difficult because we weren't going up the sheer side of it. We were going up at one of the ends of this island, book-shaped island. So there was plenty of places to, ledges to hang on to and so forth. So we didn't need any ropes. But it was a tough climb because you had all that weight on you. We got to the top, and it was the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen. We set up camp. Whoever was on duty, cooking duty that night, started making the dinner. And the rest of us went exploring on this incredible island. Now, two things happened that night. One was I saw something that I've never seen since or before. And it was called the Loon March, the Loon Dance. Some call it the dance, some call it the march. And what happens is loons, which are the most beautiful bird in the world, form a V shape. And they start flying from the water together in this V shape. So they're taking off from the water and flying right over the surface of the water. There aren't any waves on this lake because it's so narrow that the wind would have to be going just in the exact direction for there to be any waves. So there weren't any waves. And the loons were flying right above the water, so close to the water that their wings would hit the water. And they got their wings in unison, so that every time they struck the water, all of their wings struck the water at the same time. And it made this rhythmic beat as they flew the entire length of this lake right above the water. And that's the loon dance. And that was such an amazing thing to see. We went to bed. Otto Sponge had announced that the next day we would be able to stay on the island. We had got it, it was part of the plan that we would spend the whole day there, which was really fun. We were excited about that. There was a lot to see. That night, after everybody went to bed, one of my buddies came to my tent and woke me up and said, come on, let's go exploring. So I got up, got out of the tent quietly. We snuck away from the campsite and we started exploring the island. As we got to the far side of this plateau, we could see a pretty big ledge. Now, this was not the side of the island that we climbed up on. It was the opposite side. But we could see a flat ledge down about 20 feet. So we kind of climbed down there just to see what things look like from there. We got to this ledge, and we looked over, and it was almost straight down to the water. I mean, it was like we were looking at the water straight below us, but there was rocks right on the edge of it. Kind of hard to tell how far out those rocks stuck out. But being 14 years old, you know, you think at 14 that, you know, you can't possibly get harmed, right? You think you're completely invulnerable to any kind of harm. So we're sitting there watching the birds, listening to the loons. The moon, you could see the moon was a full moon, and it was shining on the lake. So it was brightening up things, and you could see where the water was because the moon was reflecting on the water. And all of a sudden, my friend took off his shirt, took off his pants. He's now standing there in his underwear, and he says, "I'm going to dive in." And I said, "You are out of your mind." He said, "No, I'm doing it. I'm diving in." Now we had to be 50 feet above the water. That's just a guess. But he looked down, he closed his eyes, he shoved off, had to clear a tree because there was the top of a pine tree about 10 feet below that ledge we were on, and he had to get over that pine tree or he was in big trouble. He barely cleared that pine tree. And then I couldn't see him anymore. And then I heard the splash. And then I heard nothing. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what if he hit? What if it was shallow? What if he hit his head, broke his neck? And I'm thinking, what do I do? What do I do? And then I hear, "Your turn, chicken." Now, what am I going to do? I did not want to dive into that darkness, into the abyss. I did not want to do that. But he did it. And now I have to do it. So just like him, I took off my shirt, I took off my pants, my jeans. I think I left my shoes on. And I knew, God, I got to get past that tree. Whatever I do, I got to get past that tree or I'll just be tumbling down the side of this cliff. And suddenly I just swallowed hard and took a big breath and pushed off as far as I could. And I saw the tree go right by my face, but I didn't hit it. And then I'm heading down into the darkness. I don't know where the water is, so I remember making my hands into fists so that I would bust open the water and it wouldn't crack on my head. So I stuck my hands up above my head and fists, and I just waited for that water to hit. Bam! Like I'd run into a wall. I hit the water. And then I stopped. And it was dark. And my first thought was, I'm still alive. I didn't get killed. Then I thought, where the hell is up? I didn't know where up was. When I hit the water, I spun some. So I didn't know whether up was that way, that way, that way, that way. I had no idea where up was. How do I make sure I go up to where the air is? And then I realized I'm running out of breath. I've been holding my breath since I started that dive. So what I did was I let a bubble out. And then I followed the bubble because the bubble went up. And I swam up and I swam up, and it seemed like forever because I was running out of air and I needed oxygen desperately. And I swam up, and then I thought, maybe I'm going the wrong way. And I thought, no, just trust it now. Trust it. Follow the bubble. And I kept going towards the bubble. And suddenly I hit the surface. And I hear my friend cheering at me. And I was so relieved. I had survived. Oh my goodness. Well, we climbed back up, got our clothes on, went back to our tents, relieved, and fell deep asleep. Next day, we woke up and we had a blast. First of all, we didn't have to go anywhere in the morning. We were going to spend the day there. We did some more cliff diving, only a little lower. Otto had known of a better spot, a safer place to cliff dive, and wasn't quite so dangerous. So we did that. We did some fishing, and just really had a fun day. I had a lot of time to talk to Otto Sponge that day. Such a cool guy. He wanted to know all about my life and what I thought and what my goals and dreams were. Of course, in those days, all I wanted to do is be a coach of a sports, just like my dad was. So he was very interested in that. Finally, that night, it was time again to go to bed. And we were exhausted. Now this night, there's no way I'm getting up. I'm going to hit that sack and sleep through the night because I really needed the sleep. Sometime, I'm guessing, around midnight, I heard a scream. I heard somebody yelling. It was a male voice, familiar voice. I got out of the tent, and my tent mate came out with me. His name was Dennis. We were good friends. Especially after this, we stayed good friends for many years. So Dennis and I are looking around to see what's happening, who's yelling. And then we look over by the edge of the lake, by the edge of the cliff. And it's dark, but there's just enough light made by the fire, just enough light to see the silhouette of a bear. And we could tell that we were looking at the back end of the bear, the hind end. And the bear was standing upright on 2 feet. And then I heard the voice again. And it was definitely the voice of Otto Sponge. And he was on the other side of that bear. And that bear was going at him. He yelled to us, Otto yelled to us, grab some pots and pans. I need you to make as much noise as you can. And we did. We grabbed pots and pans and we started banging them and yelling at the bear and banging him. But that bear was not going to be distracted by that. It didn't scare him a bit. He was focused on his next meal. And that meal was going to be Otto Sponge. Dennis kept banging on the pots and pans. But I felt like I had to do something else besides making noise. And I didn't know what to do. And that's when my brain stopped working. And I just went into instinct mode. I just went into football mode. And I just charged at the bear. And at the same time I yelled to Otto to get out of the way. And I charged at the back of the bear. And I threw with every ounce of strength of my 105-pound body into the back of that bear with everything I had. And I bounced off that bear like a rubber ball, landed flat on my back. I got up onto my butt looking at where the bear was, and I could see the bear bending over towards where Otto was. And as he bent over, his front paws went to the ground but missed the ground. I don't know if I caused that or he just did that on his own, but the bear weight and momentum caused it to keep going forward and start rolling forward down the cliff. And that bear kept picking up speed. I went over to the side of the cliff and I could see the tail end of his journey down the cliff and bounced off of a rock and landed on another rock, big boulder at the edge of the shoreline. So it had fallen 40, 50 feet or more, and it laid there, presumably dead. And then I heard Otto Sponge say, "Oh God, thank you, man. You saved my life." I looked over at Otto. He had gotten out of the way. He heard me yell. He dove to the side just as I hit that bear. I mean, it was God's doing. I'm telling you, it was God's doing, because I bounced off that bear like the bear wasn't even was just a boulder or a tree trunk. But somehow it was just enough to get it leaning forward. I think. Maybe not. But whatever. The bear was at the bottom of the cliff. And Otto and I were safe. Dennis came running over, still banging the pots and pans and hooping and hollering. Oh my gosh. So that is the bear story. I have one more story to tell you. Not quite as dramatic as that one, but it's such a great story, and it takes place in the same location. Not the exact same location, not the exact same set of lakes, because every time you go in the Boundary Waters, you know, you end up on a different lake than you ever saw before. This is much later in my life. I had to bring my son Jay, who's 5 years old, to the Boundary Waters. Now, he's only 5, but I didn't go alone. I went with my brother Dan, his fiancée, who later became his wife, and they brought another friend along, somebody named Cheryl, a friend of Dan's fiancée. Her name is Mo. So Dan, Mo, and Cheryl, myself, and my son Jay. And Jay was such a tough little guy. He always wanted to be an adult before he was still a child. So, you know, when we got to the portages, I gave him 2 paddles and I put a small knapsack on his back. So he had to carry 2 paddles, holding them like he'd hold a cane and or a big stick, and he had a knapsack on his back and another knapsack on his front. Now, because he's 5, these were smaller knapsacks than the rest of us carried. He was too small to be dealing with a canoe, so the rest of us, the other 4 of us, were doing the canoes, 2 each. 2 persons on each canoe. We got to a place to spend the night on the shore of a lake. And I knew from looking at the map that on the other side of that lake, which wasn't very far away, because the lake here was really more of a river that dumped into this pool. So it had a large flow of water going through it. I knew from the map that the other side of the lake was Canada. So we were on the US side and Canada was like 50 feet away. And in between us was this boulder, and the water was rushing around this boulder. So I felt like after canoeing all day that I wanted to take a swim, and I thought, you know, it'd be really fun to be able to go over and say, hey, I'm in Canada. So I told my son, stay there, don't leave. I'm going to swim over to Canada, and then I'll come right back. So I got in the water and I took off swimming, and the current was a lot stronger than I expected. It just caught me by surprise. So I had to swim pretty fast. And as I'm swimming, I'm trying to get to that rock, but the rock seems to be moving. It wasn't really moving. I was moving because of the current, and I was moving downstream. And then I got to the point where I could see where the water was taking me, and it was taking me over a waterfalls that I didn't know was there. And I heard my 5-year-old son start screaming, Daddy, 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 swim, swim, Daddy, swim. He was screaming because he knew what was happening. And I had just figured it out. I was going over that waterfalls if I didn't make it to that rock. So I swam as hard as I could. I never in my life swam that hard. And now I'm having to swim basically upstream. And very, very, very slowly, if I stayed right in line with the rock, I could get to that rock. And I swam as hard as I could and as hard as I could. And I finally got to that rock. And I grabbed onto it for dear life. And then when I rested, then I pulled myself up on the rock. And I looked over at my son, 5 years old, and I thought, how foolish, how stupid I was. I could have died right then and there, and I'd be leaving him without his daddy up in the boundary waters. I thought, how dumb. So when I finally recovered, got my strength back and my wind, I dove far as I could towards the US side where my son was and my brother and his other people in our party. And we swam, and I swam back to the US side. I never did make it to the Canadian side. Next day, we get in our canoes and we're headed off. And sometimes, you know, things, when you get really tired and things get hard, you can get a little short-tempered. Well, that's what happened. We got to this place where we had the portage to get to the next lake, and there was basically two options. One was a very long 2-mile portage on a trail, but it was 2 miles long to get to up to the top of this cliff. Or the second is if we could somehow get our canoes up that cliff, we could just go right up to where we're going to get to and skip the 2-mile portage. Well, that was the second dumbest thing I've ever done because it was a lot harder to get those canoes up that cliff and onto the top. It was probably only 30 feet, but you have no idea how difficult it was to get those canoes up. And first we had to take our knapsacks up and then come back and finally bring the canoes up, and we had to like make a string of us, 4 of us, and keep pushing the canoe up to the next person, a little further to the next person till we got it up. But it was extremely difficult. It was kind of warm that day, so we were hot, and it was not at all pleasant. We finally got to the top where the portage came out. if we had taken the portage, this is where it would end up. And so we were at that point. It probably took us much longer to go up the cliff instead of taking the 2-mile walk. So there we were. We're at the top of the cliff. We put all our backpacks back into the canoes, and we took off down the stream towards the lake that we're headed. We finally get to the stream, and so we stop, and I think one of them, Mo, says, "Okay, where do we go from here?" And so I had to get out the map, but I couldn't find the map. And after a short panic, I realized I had left the map on a ledge on that cliff that we took the canoes over. I don't know why, I took it out, set it down, and that's where it is. So now we had just canoed about 30, 40 minutes. Now we had to go back. So my brother and I, Danny, decided we'll leave the canoes here with the gals and Jay, and we'll walk back, because you could walk along next to the, next to the river. So we walked back, had to climb back down. Sure enough, the map was right where I left it. So we got back up, and we decided when we got back up, because we were tired, and that was kind of a rocky climb. It wasn't easy to get there. So we decided it would be easier, now that we're going with the current, to swim back to the canoes. So we got in the water, and I'm holding the map in my left hand, and I'm doing the side stroke with my right. And my brother is right next to me, and we're both doing the side stroke. And we go by a portage, and just as we go by that portage, that 2-mile portage we tried to avoid, another group came out, and they saw us swimming by. No canoes, just a map in one hand, and that's it. And I said to them as we swam by, "We don't need any damn canoes. We swim the BWCA." And they were such, their mouths dropped open. They just could not believe what they saw. And we kept going, swimming back to our canoes, which was in the next lake. So that's the next story. Well, my friends, I'm going to stop here. I've got one more Boundary Waters story to tell you, but I'm running a little out of time today. At my 4th episode, I'm going to take a little time to read to you some of the comments that people have sent in to us, either by calling and leaving us a message or by sending an email. So I'm going to take a little time, and I'm going to bring my producer in and have him read to us some of those comments so that you can hear what people are saying about this podcast, or questions they have, or criticisms that they have. We'll share them all. So if you'd like to have yours read, please feel free to contact me. Again, the email address is my name, T. Feely. So it's TFEELY at me.com. And that number again, if you want to call and leave a message, is 813-776-6774. I'll say that one more time, 813-776-6774. And I look forward to hearing from you. And I hope you'll like us. Let us know if you like it. Hope you like it. I don't have a subscribe button set up yet, but I will eventually. And if you want to subscribe when it is ready, we'd be more than happy to have you subscribe. But in the meantime, spread the word and come back and see our next podcast, the next story from the Boundary Waters. Have a great evening. Thank you.